Welcome back, everyone, to the Beyond Practice podcast, where we help you get to the bottom of complex topics.
That's right.
I'm Taylor Grant,
And I'm Casey Bishop.
and we are so glad you're here with us for the last deep dive
This is it.
in our change management series.
It's going to be a good one, though.
Oh, yeah. This is going to be a good one. Before we dive in, though, I do want to give a big shout out
Yes.
to Slav Gregorowski,
Absolutely.
whose work has been the inspiration for this whole series.
Really laid the foundation for us to think about these topics.
100%. Now we're talking about adaptive and agile approaches to change.
Okay.
And this is something that's become more and more important
Oh, for sure.
as the world is just changing so rapidly.
Absolutely.
I mean, think about it. Project scopes shift.
Yeah, deadlines move.
Deadlines get moved up.
Crazy.
New technologies are emerging constantly.
It's nonstop.
How do we keep up?
Right. It's not just about managing change anymore. It's like we have to be adaptable.
Yeah.
That's the core competency we need now.
Yeah. So how do we get there?
Well, that's what we're talking about today.
Okay.
We're going to look at two frameworks to help us do just that.
Okay. Lay it on me.
The ORCA model and narrative strategy.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
You should be.
So let's start with narrative strategy.
Yeah.
What does storytelling have to do with change management?
Right. You might be thinking that, but the reality is every organization already has a narrative.
Really?
Yeah, whether they realize it or not. It's that story they tell about themselves, their values,
Okay.
their goals, their impact. And that narrative, intentional or not, it's shaping how people see that organization.
Wow. So it's like this underlying current.
Exactly. It's always there influencing things like customer loyalty and even employee engagement.
So we need to take control of the current.
Yes, exactly. Taking control of that narrative is crucial for change management. We want to make sure that story really reflects the organization's identity, values, and goals,
As they change over time.
especially as they change over time.
Okay, so we're not just letting it happen, we are actually shaping it.
Exactly. And it can be really powerful. Think about it in project management. Let's say you're leading a team through a tough software implementation.
Okay,
Using narrative strategy, you can craft a story around that project.
I see.
You can highlight the benefits for the team, for the organization, even the end users.
So you're connecting it to a bigger purpose.
Exactly. And that can make a huge difference in buy-in and motivation. When people get the why, they're more likely to embrace it.
Right, it makes it more meaningful. It makes it more human.
Absolutely.
Okay, so our source material outlines 6 steps to creating a narrative strategy. Can we walk through these?
Let's do it.
Because I think anyone can benefit from understanding how to craft a good story.
For sure. So, step 1, define your core message. What's at the heart of your story?
Okay.
It comes from your organization's purpose objectives, the mission, the why behind everything you do.
So for this podcast, our core message is to make complex topics accessible and empower our listeners.
Exactly, got it. All right, step 2, know your audience. You got to understand their perspective, their values, their needs.
You can't hit a target you can't see, right?
Exactly. You need to know who you're talking to, what matters to them, and how they'll receive your message.
Okay, and then step 3, this is where the magic happens, right?
This is it. Crafting that compelling story. You bring your core message to life with real examples, anecdotes, data. You're painting a picture with words.
It's about making that emotional connection.
Yes.
Not just spitting out facts.
100%.
Yeah.
And then we add layers. Step 4, explore different formats, maybe videos, interactive experiences, but keep your messaging consistent across all platforms.
So it's like a whole narrative ecosystem.
Exactly. And then you encourage participation. That's step 5.
Yeah.
Make your audience active participants in the story.
Not just listeners.
Right. Use interactive elements, Q&A sessions, even invite people to share their own stories.
So we create a sense of ownership.
Exactly. And finally, step 6, reinforce and evolve your narrative. Gather feedback, adapt your story, celebrate milestones.
So it's constantly being refined and adapted.
Exactly. Because a narrative is not static. It needs to breathe, evolve, and grow as your organization changes.
Right.
Yeah.
I can see how this is so valuable in project management.
Oh, absolutely.
You know how often project goals shift and timelines get adjusted, new stakeholders?
All the time.
You've got to be able to adapt your narrative.
You do, to keep everyone on the same page and motivated.
It's not just managing expectations. It's about building trust and a shared sense of purpose.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, I do want to highlight some benefits of using narrative strategy
Yeah,
for those of us working in these fast-paced, ever-changing environments.
absolutely. So one of the biggest benefits is creating a stronger emotional connection with your team, your stakeholders, your customers, whoever you're trying to engage.
It's moving beyond just the transactional.
Yes. It's about building relationships.
And when people feel connected to a project or an initiative, they're more likely to go the extra mile.
Yeah, totally. They'll be resilient in the face of challenges, and they'll celebrate those successes together.
It's more than a job.
It's a shared mission.
And another benefit is that it helps unify purpose.
Absolutely. By crafting that compelling narrative,
Mm.
you provide a shared vision. Everyone can get behind that.
And with all the distractions today and shifting priorities, having that shared sense of purpose is so important.
More important than ever.
It's like a compass.
It is. It
Yeah.
guides everyone in the same direction, even when things get tough.
Creates that sense of alignment internally and externally.
Exactly. All right, so we've talked about the power of storytelling with narrative strategy. Now, let's switch gears a bit and look at a framework that helps us assess our readiness for change.
Okay, you're talking about the ORCA model, right?
That's the one, Organizational Readiness to Change Assessment.
It does sound a little intimidating.
Yeah, the name might be a mouthful, but the idea is actually pretty simple.
Okay, so break it down for me.
Basically, RCA is like a diagnostic tool.
Okay.
It helps figure out an organization's capacity and willingness to embrace change.
So not just for huge companies or complex projects.
Not at all. It can be used in any situation where there's change happening, like leading a team, launching a new product, even trying to form a new habit.
So it's about understanding where you stand in relation to the change you want to make.
Exactly. Now, an ORCA assessment looks at three key areas: evidence assessment, context assessment, and facilitation assessment.
Okay, let's take those one by one. Starting with evidence assessment, what are we actually assessing?
So evidence assessment is all about examining the data, the research, the reasoning behind the need for change. It's about asking questions like, do we have a strong argument for this change? Is there agreement on why this change is necessary? Do we have data or evidence to back up our decision?
So it's like building a foundation for the change, making sure it's not just a random idea.
Exactly. It's about being deliberate and having a good understanding of the why behind the change. And think about how critical this is in project management. Let's say you're suggesting a big shift in a project's methodology. If you haven't done your homework with evidence assessment, you're going to run into pushback from your team stakeholders, maybe even upper management.
Right, because without solid evidence, it just feels like change for the sake of change.
Exactly. Now let's move on to context assessment. This is where we zoom out a little and look at both internal and external factors that might affect how ready an organization is for change.
So we're looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly. Internally, we're thinking about stuff like leadership culture, employee morale, communication patterns, and available resources. Do we have a culture that encourages taking risks and trying new things? Do we have the resources and the setup to put this change into action effectively?
So understanding the lay of the land internally.
Right. And then we have to think about the external context, too. What's happening in our industry? Are there new rules or policies we need to know about? What are our competitors up to? What are the general economic trends?
So it's a 360-degree view looking at all the forces at play.
Exactly. And finally, we have facilitation assessment. This one focuses on evaluating if the organization can actually make the change happen. It's about the processes, the systems, the leadership practices, all the stuff that needs to be in place for a smooth and effective change.
Like having a roadmap and making sure you have the right vehicle and supplies.
Great analogy. So with facilitation assessment, we're looking at leadership practices. Do leaders walk the walk? Are they good at communicating? Do they empower their teams?
So it's more than just having a plan. It's about having the right leadership to execute it.
Exactly. We're also looking at those who are leading the charge. Do they have the credibility to inspire others? Are they skilled communicators and collaborators?
It's about having the right people in the right positions.
Exactly. And then we're thinking about the communication strategy for the project. Is it clear, concise, and consistent? Are we getting the right information to the right people at the right time?
Communication is so crucial in any change.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the implementation plan itself. Is it realistic? Can we actually achieve it? Does it consider potential obstacles and backup plans?
So facilitation assessment makes sure everything's set up to support the change.
It does. Now, to make this more concrete, let's imagine a project team that's moving to a new Agile methodology. Let's say their evidence assessment shows there's a good reason for this change. The data says Agile leads to quicker delivery times and happier customers. But then their context assessment reveals that the team is already swamped and feeling the pressure. And their facilitation assessment shows there's not enough training and support for those who are new to Agile.
So even though there's a good reason for the change, the context and implementation could cause some problems.
Exactly. And by using ORCA to spot these potential issues early on, the project manager can take steps to fix them proactively. Maybe push back some deadlines to give the team a breather. Maybe invest in some Agile training or bring in an expert coach.
So ORCA helps you see the change from all angles.
Exactly. It's about taking a holistic view and being ready for those bumps in the road that always seem to come up with change.
It's important to remember that ORCA isn't a one-time thing, right?
Right. It's
That-
not like checking boxes off a list.
Gotcha.
It's a constant process of checking in and adjusting.
Yeah.
As your project moves forward, you may need to look at your ORCA assessment again and make tweaks as needed. Adaptability is key.
That continuous improvement mindset.
Exactly. Now, are there any downsides to the ORCA model that we should know about?
Good question.
Like any model, ORCA has its limitations. One of the biggest is making sure the data you're using is accurate and representative.
So if you're using old data or a biased sample, your assessment might not be reliable.
Exactly. Another limitation is that while ORCA looks at both internal and external factors, it mainly focuses on what's happening inside the organization.
So you might miss some big external trends.
That's right. So it's important to add to the ORCA findings with a broader analysis of what's going on outside. And finally, maybe the most important limitation is that ORCA's success depends on the organization's commitment to change.
So it's a tool, not a magic wand.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Even the most thorough ORCA assessment won't lead to successful change if the organization isn't truly on board with making it happen.
Leadership buy-in and a culture that embraces change are essential.
Absolutely. So for our listeners who are dealing with change in their own workplaces, how can they use ORCA for their own projects?
Yeah, it's great to talk about these frameworks, but how can we actually put them into practice?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Well, I think whether you're a project manager, a team leader, or just a team member, you can use the ideas behind ORCA to figure out your own readiness for change. Ask yourself, do I fully get why this change is happening? Do I have the skills and resources to adjust? Are my colleagues and I on the same page?
So taking that self-awareness and applying it to the change.
Exactly. And by doing that, you can find potential roadblocks and deal with them head on. Maybe it means getting some extra training, changing how you communicate, or just having an honest conversation with your team about what's worrying you.
Taking charge of your own change journey.
Precisely. And I think that leads us perfectly into our final thoughts for this episode.
Okay, so we have talked about so much today.
Right.
Narrative strategy, the ORCA model.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We've been on quite a journey
We have.
to change
It's
management.
been fun.
It has been fun. But I think one thing that keeps coming up
Yeah.
is that need for adaptability.
It really is essential.
It is. It's not just a buzzword anymore.
No, it's like a must-have skill now.
Yeah, it's like, how do we survive in this crazy world?
Right.
And I think that's what I find so interesting about narrative strategy in the ORCA model.
Yeah.
They give us the tools to be more adaptable, more intentional, and ultimately more successful when it comes to navigating change.
They help us understand not just what needs to change, but how to make that change happen.
Right, and how to make it successful.
Exactly.
And that it's not just a one-time thing.
Oh, definitely not.
It's
It's a
constant.
process.
It's a process.
Continuous improvement, always looking for ways to get better, adapt to new information, learn from what we've done.
So as we wrap up this deep dive series on change management, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought.
Okay, I'm ready.
How might consciously applying narrative strategy and the ORCA model impact the success of your next project or initiative?
Wow, that's a great question.
And I think it's a question each listener is going to have to answer for themselves
Yeah, for their own situation.
based on their own goals with their
Yeah,
contact.
okay.
But I have a feeling that just by asking the question,
Mhm.
taking the time to think about it,
Yeah,
and maybe even trying to apply these concepts,
I agree.
that's a powerful first step.
Absolutely.
And you don't have to have all the answers right away.
No, just start exploring.
Yeah, experiment and be open to learning and adapting as you go.
That's what it's all about.
That is what it's all about.
Thank you all so much for joining us on this wild ride of change management. We've loved exploring this with you, and we can't wait to bring you more deep dives in the future.
Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep leading positive change.
And keep practicing beyond practice.